Alright, so in the last video of this fuel injection to carburation conversion, we installed a new fuel pump. And the next thing you do when you install a fuel pump is to get power to it when the ignition is on. And so the whole thing about these electronic fuel ignition Volkswagens is they have a little computer in the back, and the fuel pump is controlled by the fuel pump relay. And I've already bypassed that Bosch relay with a couple of store-bought relays, so I have kind of a shortcut here, but I'm going to go over how to wire your fuel pump without, rewiring the whole car. It's really pretty easy once you know where to plug in. So let's get in the back of the car and have a look at that section. All right, so here we are in the back seat, behind the back seat in the 79 Super Beetle. And it has a little control module. It's kind of a computer, and you'll find this is the Bosch, what they call it a fuel pump relay, but it actually has a relay for, it has two individual relays that are kind of integrated. Mine was burnt out, and so I had created kind of a Frankenstein version with two store-bought relays, and it works just fine this way. I was going to do another video on this, but as the ended up being something else wrong with the car and the relay didn't solve the problem, I didn't do that video. If you're interested, let me know. I'll go ahead and put that together. But anyway, let's go over these relays. So on the original, you can barely see here, there is a diagram on here that tells you just some number codes, but you really can't read it. So what I did here was I transposed those codes onto a sheet here, and I've written a diagram of what each of these parts are. Now in this case, because we're converting from this computer and the switched fuel pump, we're just going with a standard carbureted solution. We don't need half of this information. All we really need is this one right here. 88D is the fuel pump, right? And so in the case of my hodgepodge solution here, I had taken a relay and I routed the battery power from 88Y. You see that's right here, the stripy one, and that's the dedicated power. That is always on. This one is on always, regardless of whether there's ignition or anything. And I have a ground. See, this ground right here is shared between both of these relays, and that one, if you follow that back up in here, it goes to the ground, which is 85. That is a dedicated ground, and it's got a ground on there. So what I did on that ground also was I added a 2.7 ohm resistor, because you don't want to create a situation where you have 12 volts dedicated going through this little small gauge wire, so you don't want to melt it or anything. And actually that wasn't my idea. When I took apart this device, it had a 2.7 ohm resistor on the ground, so I'm just trying to reproduce the same effect, and so that's what we did on that one. So make sure you put a resistor on your ground if you're going to do that on there. Again, when you set up a relay, you have your voltage and your ground, and then you have the power, which is what's going to go out. And in this case, we want to get power to 88D. So we want power to go from 88Y to 88D using the signal from the fuel pump, right? The signal in this case is going to be when the ignition comes on. And so that's what I've got here. These are the blue wires here. These are my signal wires. You can see there's a little bit of shrink wrap on here. What I did on this one, I did the solution with the relays in this case. You can see some of these signal wires are used more than once. So in the case of the computerized solution, the fuel pump goes on when you're starting the car, and then the fuel pump is controlled by the computer after that. There's two other instances where it will turn on the fuel pump, and so both of those instances you don't want to have the voltage running backwards through those lines. So in this little shrink wrap here, what I have is a little diode, inline diode that I put in here. So the electrical circuit will only go one direction. So the problem that we need to do in this solution is we need to have the fuel pump go on. We need to provide power to 88D when the ignition is on. We don't want to just hot wire it to the battery, because then you'll kill the battery and the fuel pump will run when the engine's not running, right? So when the ignition goes on, we want the fuel pump to get power, right? Well, if you notice on here, none of these say ignition. One of them says that it goes to the ignition coil, but this is not hot. For some reason, I don't know why they had this on there. If it was just, you know, feedback, so the computer knew that the ignition coil had a spark, or whatever this one is, I don't know. But that is not a hot wire when the ignition's on. The good news is that the computer gets turned on when the ignition comes on. So I'm going to show you which terminal on the computer harness will be on, and we'll go ahead and plug this one in, and I'll prove that the fuel pump will work through this little relay. All right, let's take this harness off, and I'll show you which pin to plug into. All right, so here's the harness. You can see it's got a lot of pins, but not all of them are occupied. But the pin that you want to plug in on is this one right here at the very beginning, number 1. And what I've got on that is I actually when I took apart my old relay, I salvaged the plugs from that relay to use for my little solution here. And so this is the right size plug that you need to go right into that. And I've tested it. When you turn the ignition on, this is where the computer gets power. So that will become our signal, because we've already got power over here. That'll become our signal that the ignition is on, and that will turn on the fuel pump. Let me show you what that looks like. All right, so there you go. I've got it plugged in on pin number 1. That's our signal on the relay, the signal switch. It goes to ground, and that will allow power to pass from this side of the relay to that one. All right, so let's go ahead and turn the car on. It's plugged in back here, and we'll prove that the fuel pump comes on when the ignition comes on. Ignition. See, it's got the spring on it, so that's in ignition mode. Down here you can hear the fuel pump. You can feel it. It's pumping. All right, let's turn the car over and see if it starts. Well, this is as installed. It's very rich, but it is running. All right, so a quick little review about what we did today. Earlier in the video, we have replaced all the fuel injected components and put a new carburetor in. That carburetor required a different fuel source, so we put a new fuel pump in. That fuel pump needed to bypass the computer and run directly when the ignition's running. So we rigged a relay off of the power from the computer as a signal, and we are running 88Y to 88D from the old connector, so that the fuel pump runs when the ignition is on. And that's pretty much that. We'll probably clean this up a little, do some wire management. Still gonna need to have this, but I think I'll hide it behind here. There's a little space back there I can hide it. And so that's not gonna be something that's gonna get in the way of anything. But this can come out, engine runs just fine without it. And we can probably even take the second relay off as well. Just run the one relay. So that is it for today, and this part of the project. I'll get a good picture of this, and that way you can use it for reference. That'll be the last little part of this series on the fuel injection to carburation conversion on a 1979 Super Beetle. Cheers!